So welcome Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaninan to our the panel, and it's a privilege and honor to have you here. Good evening to you and welcome.
Very good evening to all the viewers. And
good evening, sir.
It's my privilege to be able to participate and chat with so many of you today evening. Hopefully all of you are keeping safe during these uncertain times.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining. I would like to just give a short CV of Dr. K.V. Subramanian, sir. And of course, all of you would have seen him on everywhere. He is the chief economist of India, but I have to give a brief CV for the sake of the foreigners who have all joined inside. So Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian is an Indian economist and current 17th chief economic advisor to the government of India from December 7th, 2018, and he succeeded Mr. Arvind Subramanian. Born on 5th May 1971 in Bhilai, Chhattisgarh, he attended MGM Senior Secondary School, Sector 6, Bhilai. Subramanian holds an MBA and a PhD in financial economics from the University of Chicago. His PhD was completed under the supervision of Udi Zingyals and Raghuram Rajan. He is also an alumni of IIT Kanpur, BTech, and IIM Calcutta. Mr. Subramanian has worked in expert committees for SEBI and RBI, being part of the major economic and corporate reforms in India. He has worked with JP Morgan Chase, ICICI Bank, and TCS. He was a board member in Bandhan Bank, the National Institute of Bank Management, and the Reserve Bank of India Academy, and has academically been a part of finance faculty of Guzita Business School at Emory University in the United States of America. Subramanian is also currently a tenured professor of the Indian School of Business and earlier worked as an executive assistant to the chairman of the Fixed Income Moneymakers and Derivatives Association of India. And just to sum up everything, he is the chief economist and economic advisor to the government of India at the moment. And I request that Dr. Raj would moderate this whole session. And I'm sure that this is going to be one of the most interesting and most viewed sessions of all time. Thank you, Raj, and thank you, Dr. Subramanian. And over to both of you.
Thank you very much, Satish, Dr. Janakiram. I really appreciate you handing it over to me because I'm really, really excited. I know Dr. Subramanian for now about 7 or 8 years. As some of you might know, I am a visiting faculty at the Indian School of Business, although my permanent position is at the University of Texas at Austin in the USA. I've been visiting ISB, Indian School of Business, for 8 years, like I said, and I've known Dr. Subramanian for all these years. My very first encounter with Dr. Subramanian was when I entered one of the biggest auditoriums in ISB. It's called Khemka Auditorium. And there was this really well-spoken gentleman on stage commanding over the audience. And I looked up to see who this could be, and it looked like a young student. And I was like, wow, these ISB students are so good. I mean, even a young student can get up there and command the audience like this. And only later on did I learn that it was actually none other than Dr. K.V. Subramanian. Another little piece of tidbit at ISB, and I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Subramanian, but you and I debated on the topic of whether GDP or GNH is more important. For those who are not familiar with GNH, it's gross national happiness. I represented happiness, he represented GDP, and I have to accept that he gave me a nice trouncing, at the debate. He's just an excellent debater. He's very articulate, you'll see, and he's got a great voice too. I also know that he's a very good singer. I don't think that we're going to get to see that part of him today, but maybe, who knows, So we'll see. So let me jump in right away and ask him the very first question that I have. So it's about his childhood, his background. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, your journey through the years? Which parts of the world or India did you grow up in? And how did all those experiences affect your personality, your interests, your worldviews?
First of all, Raj, very good evening or good morning to you, and thanks for such kind words. It turns out Raj is actually my senior from IIM Calcutta as well. Maybe those kind words actually come from that connection. In any case, so to all our viewers, this is something which I actually want to share. So we are two brothers, me and a younger brother. My younger brother is also, had the good fortune of actually studying engineering at IIT Kanpur, then went to IIM Ahmedabad, and now is a professor at the Indian School of Business itself. When one looks at, two brothers, both of them, well educated, somehow the presumption is that, we must be coming from privileged backgrounds. Actually, I must say that, and this is, of course, we owe a lot of credit to our parents. We come from extremely humble backgrounds. In fact, the two of us were the first people to ever step into a college in our entire, in all generations. So as the elder one, I was 2 years older than my younger brother. So I was the first one to ever step into college. And I still remember, a couple of years later, in fact, before that, when we were going for our counseling, there is a process called counseling when after you finish the joint entrance examination for the IITs. When my father accompanied, me for what is called counseling, which is basically a process of selecting a branch that you would want to, specialize in. I still remember he was so, enamored, because coming from the background that he came, it was just, stepping into the auspices of an IIT was, quite a big thing. He lost his father when he was just 7 years old. And so he could only complete what used to be called SSLC, which is basically 11 years of formal schooling. But he was a voracious reader, actually. So somebody who educated himself on his own, enormously. So he, started out as immediately after his own schooling, he had to start working because, economic conditions demanded it. So while he had appeared for what is called the Railway Service Commission, to join as a on the clerical grade, he already started working as a casual worker in the Indian Railways. So that's what he started out as, and then ended as a gazetted officer. So that's the background that I come from. And so I think a lot of what the way I think, I guess, about policy making, the way I, sort of look back at my own life, all of that, I would say, it's just been, in some sense, an Indian dream come true. Not in terms of riches or anything, but just the ability to contribute. I think, it's just been a unique privilege. And I must, like I think everybody else, we have to be very, very thankful to our parents. But especially I feel, given the kind of background that I come from, it's just in terms of specifics of where I was born. My father used to work in what is called the Southeastern Railway. So, it used to be in what is now called Chhattisgarh in the central part of India. It was then called just Madhya Pradesh. So I was born in a government hospital in this place called Bilaspur. Spent my early schooling up to the 5th grade, or class 5, as we call in India, in Bilaspur. And then the rest of my schooling, I did it in this place called Durg. It's just been a dream. If ever I actually, I'm sure when we have this conversation, if I'm the first person to acknowledge that there's a lot of luck and grace that goes into whatever one gets to contribute. And I would be the last person to give myself credit, or I did it, or, it's just a fact. I mean, being at the right place at the right time, I think is what, grace and luck is all about.
Wonderful. Like my cousin Janaki Ram just said, it's answered from the heart. And, even as you were speaking, I don't know why, but I was actually getting a little bit emotional about your background. Maybe I'm getting a little bit old. I don't know. You get more sensitive as you get older. But it's also because, as my cousin knows really well, my brother knows really well, we also come from relatively humble background if you go back a couple of generations. Okay, my grandfather, the grandfather that he and I share, Dr. P. N. Raman, Mr. P. N. Raman, basically lost his parents also very, very young when he was 4 years old and stuff. And he studied under a street light, to rise up. And so it's just amazing, these stories. Okay, so
my father.
Oh yeah, same with your father too. Yeah, amazing. So because you grew up in those areas, I guess that's the secret to your Shuddh Hindi, right?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. That's that is actually I think I owe my Hindi to growing up there. At the same time, I think it's also, an aspect of my personality, which is that put me in any place in India, I'm absolutely comfortable. I've actually lived in. I live in Delhi. I've been in the southern part of India, central part of India. Worked some time in Calcutta, in Bombay. I just feel absolutely at home. And in fact, I think one. So this is a very interesting perspective. All of us Indians actually are typically fans of cricket. So when my father used to watch cricket at that time, Krishnamurthy Srikanth was the only person playing from Tamil Nadu. So, while me and my brother always only bothered about whether India won or India lost, my father would, specifically after asking whether India won or India lost, he'll say, how well did Krishnamurthy Srikanth play? Which, to be honest, I found it odd because I just couldn't identify, with that aspect.
I mean, he was a dashing batsman, right? Very charismatic guy. So I can understand at some level.
But so was a Kapil Dev.
Oh yeah, I was a huge fan of Kapil. Even today, I don't know if you've seen his recent pictures. He's tonsured his head, and it kind of looks cool actually. All right, so let me move on to another question that all of us are asked when we grow up. What do you want to be when you grow up? Right? As a child, you're asked this question. I don't know if you remember what your answer was those days. But I have a feeling that the chances are very low that you said finance professor. Tell us more. Or maybe you did. I don't know.
No, so actually, I guess I'll reminisce two kinds of answers to this. One is, when I was very young, when I was asked, and a lot of my sort of older friends and uncles and aunties whom now we ourselves are uncles and aunties, but whom we used to call them as. So when they reminisce, they would say that I as a very young person, I used to say that I want to become an engine driver, railway engine driver, and for the very simple reason, my father used to be in the Indian Railways, and we used to travel a lot. And somehow I used to say the engine driver gets to go any place in the in the whole country, and so he gets to travel so much. So I want to be an engine driver. Well, that was, I think, my first dream. But then I guess once I became a little older, then my father used to so very typical middle class. Two sons. He used to say, my older one will become a doctor, my younger one will become an engineer. And he used to reel off these. In some sense, he used to basically read about all this and just convey it. And he'd say, I want you to become. He felt that I should be a doctor, and I should have a string of degrees to my name: FRCS, MBBS, MD, and then FRCS or FRCP. And I still remember the expansions of those abbreviations because he would tell us those. So, and therefore, then I would just go and regurgitate the same thing too when I want to study well and stuff like that. So, but when I look back in terms of real, there's a particular episode that plays out in my mind. This was when I'd finished my 11th grade, and till then I didn't know what an IIT was, and somebody told me that if you want to do engineering, then IIT is the place to go. And turns out, actually, I came from a school, which wasn't, nobody before this had ever gone to IIT. And turns out, actually, I was not a very bright student up until then. In CBSE, for instance, class 10th, I had only 67%. And so, when I actually went to, a particular teacher who used to teach physics, and she asked me my school, my marks, and said, and rightly so, she said that, I don't teach students from this school. Nobody else has gotten into IIT from this school before. And, you may be better off actually trying other things, kind of. And I remember actually, disappointed by that, taking just, usually we would take the sort of the public transport, but, maybe I was just so lost in my thoughts. I just came walking almost like 7 kilometers after that event, all lost in my thoughts. If somebody had come and told me at that time, saying that you're going to be a professor, or better, let's say, saying that you're going to be the chief economic advisor of the country, I would have been, not head over heels. I would have just been saying, "What, are you crazy?" Because I don't think I would have even heard that name, chief economic advisor, or even professor for that matter at that time. So I might even possibly have asked, saying, "What do these things mean?" So from that time, I think, till here, as I already said, it's just been a dream. Infinite grace. That's all I can say.
Your saying all this reminded me as well that I actually got 68% in my 10th grade CBSE. Okay, and I wanted to get into IIT, and I applied to Agarwal. You remember this Agarwal notes or something?
Yeah.
And they actually sent me a letter saying that our cutoff is 70%, so we can't send you our notes. Being denied as a consumer the opportunity to give them money was really humiliating for me. It made my decision that I'm going to get into IIT by the dint of my own efforts. And that's where your path and my path diverged. You got into IIT, I did not.
Very nice point, Raj. In fact, I got the same letter from Agrawal as well.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yes, very much, because I had 67%. They told me you can't get it. So what I did is I actually went, and somebody in my class had the required threshold. And so I actually said, and he was not going to prepare for the IIT. I said, "Can you please enroll on my behalf? The packets will come to your home." And, I used to go and pick up the packets from him. And so, that's how, in fact, when I then started preparing in the first examinations that Agrawal held, I was among the national toppers. But wow. my name didn't appear. His name appeared, and so that was the. I used to go and pick up the packets from him, and that's how I ended up. So when I look back, actually getting from there to get a. Now, in fact, I remember one more conversation. I think this is when I look. I think the one part I would give some credit to myself is that I was never afraid of failure. I remember this conversation, sort of just being an eavesdropper to a conversation. Where people were, I came from a nondescript school. There used to be this school which all of us used to look up to, is called Delhi Public School. And the person from there, in class 10th had got 92%, and he was a topper in our entire area, sort of. So there's this, and everybody was just asking him, and this conversation about IIT was going on, and he says, no, IIT and all is very difficult. So I'm just an eavesdropper to this conversation. And there I'm thinking, why is it that this person with 92% is saying that, IIT is difficult, and I with only 67% don't think it is the case. So, thankfully I didn't give too much thought to that particular, and in some sense, I guess, I was just crazy to have, But I think this is just for especially if there are any younger viewers who are listening to these, I think the lesson is never to any measure, whether it is actually attending a particular place, university, or, marks. All these are just imperfect measures of, and never let any of that actually be a, stumbling block. For instance, even, as recent as when I was applying for the chief economic advisor's job, there were a few people who said, "Oh, what if you don't get it?" Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, isn't that actually a definition of, applying for a role like this? That it's, which is the fact that it's so hallowed. I mean, before me, 16 people have occupied that. So by definition, if you apply, it's not as if you're guaranteed to get it. Why are people asking me that question? So, but I guess it's just that, fear of failure. In some sense, some people saying, oh, if I'm told that I will get it, if I apply it, then I will apply. I think it's not having that fear of failure is something that helps. And in general, and this is something I put it in finance terms, one of the basic things that we teach in finance is that, the expected return is proportional to the risk that you take. But most of us, really get scared of trying the more risky, endeavors in life. Partly because I think, or maybe a lot because we keep thinking, what might X think, what might Y think if I fail? And that X or Y may be your father, your mother, your best friend, or whatever, right? But the thing to remember is that it's not X or Y that's going to live the life. It's going to be you who live the life. And so, X or Y might think about the outcome that you've gotten maybe for a few days, but they'll move on. But you will have to live with that outcome, and not having that regret of not having tried, I think is in some sense basically, no regrets, tried out. And if you fail after having tried, then, that's fine. There's always another day.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. And it's kind of at some level easier said than done. I see people from all over the spectrum on this dimension of fear of failure. And a lot of people have a lot of it in different contexts, and other people don't seem to have as much of it. I'm reminded of Henry Ford's quote. He said that whether you think you will fail or you think you will succeed, you are right. Okay, that's what he said. Whether you think you're going to fail, whether you think you're going to succeed, you're right. Okay, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, in other words. Okay, so just go give it your best shot, be confident. But where does that confidence come from? And I think a lot of it has to do with childhood. As you rightly said, I think that I can include myself. I can include certainly my brother. We all had great childhoods, with very supportive parents. And that's where I think that confidence comes from. And unfortunately, some people lack it, and they have to build that confidence themselves. It's very difficult to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, so to speak. Okay. But by the way, I can really vouch for his lack of fear of failure. I remember this day, I was at ISB. Maybe it was like around the 10th of December, and you and I were at Bhagwan Chaudhry's apartment, and we were engaged in karaoke. We were belting out some songs. And the very next day in the newspaper, I saw that you had been appointed as the CEA. Okay. And so you must have known that this is coming out, and it did not seem to have any effect whatsoever. If anything, it made you an even better singer, I think. Okay. Really amazing. Good for you. All right, so I'm going to move on to another question. And by the way, I see a lot of people coming in with comments and questions and raising hands. I'm really sorry, guys. We just have a bunch of questions that I want to finish off. And then after that, it's going to be over to you. I'm going to actually turn it over to my brother, and he's going to open it up to you guys. I would say that the best strategy that you can have if you do want your question asked is to wait. Okay, not type in your question right now, because it's going to float up in the kind of, list of questions. Hold off. And then as soon as we open it up, that's the point in which to send in your questions. It'll catch your attention. Okay, so here's my third question. What's the thing that keeps you up at night nowadays? Okay, obviously, as India's chief economic advisor, there's a lot riding on your decisions, right? And a lot of people's outcomes are going to be impacted. Okay, so at that level, it can't be that easy a job. Okay, and maybe you can touch a little bit upon whether you in fact have a strategy for not getting bogged down by all those kind of potential negative consequences of all these decisions and so on. But first question, what is the thing that keeps you up at night, and how do you deal with it?
So I think it's a very difficult question for me to answer, but I think I'll answer it at two levels. Firstly, let me in terms of the current role, the sense that I may, not keep the most vulnerable sections, in mind when let's say thinking about a policy outcome, sometimes actually worries me. I think and especially having come from the kind of background that I come from, and incidentally, I'm reminded actually. And these are the kind of instances that remind me to keep my eyes on that, but like what Gandhiji called his talisman, the poor and the vulnerable. So I remember, for instance, my father had never ever worn shoes, just small shoes, till I started working. And when I started working was the first time I bought him a pair of shoes, and he wore that, and he was so happy and I felt so happy seeing it. He was, by the way, much taller than me and very handsome. And so, seeing him actually wear shoes, and, he used to otherwise dress up very well. Seeing him, was such a pleasure. But that's the kind of people that, I keep thinking about. And and this is the thing that I keep reminding myself and others about, especially in a country like, like India, about 1.3, 1.4 billion people. People like us are so privileged. If you think about where you're born, what kind of parents, what they give you, right? It's such a privilege that, for people like us to be asking anything of the government is, I think, not right. Because, money doesn't grow on trees, and, because money doesn't grow on trees, you have to make the choice where to spend it. Do you want to spend it on, do you want to spend it on those where the bang for the buck will not be as high as spending it on the most vulnerable and the poor, while at the same time also making sure that, economic principles are not violated while thinking about this. I think that is what sort of goes through my thinking. But I'll tell you, one thing that has actually always helped me, and I've not just in this role, but right from my, from the time when I used to give my examinations, when I used to go into an examination, I basically said that these 3 hours, it's just my duty to answer the questions, and not worry about the outcome. Let the examiner, whoever is correcting that answer paper, do his job of determining my outcome. And even if I took a few minutes during that examination of thinking whether I'm doing well or not doing well, I am taking my focus away from what is my dharma, and my dharma is basically just to answer that question, do my part, my job, and I think again this is I owe a debt of enormous gratitude to my father. So as I was saying, he was a voracious reader. He used to read the Bhagavad Gita very regularly. He used to read it but he would not understand Sanskrit because he hadn't picked up the Devanagari script. So because I was, as you said, born and brought up in the north, and then I started learning Sanskrit from class 6 onwards. So a few months into class 6, he gives me the Bhagavad Gita and said, "Can you read these shlokas?" And all we were learning at that time is phalam phale phalani phalam phale. That's what we were learning. And with that, to go and read the Bhagavad Gita was actually quite a tough job. Yeah. But I think by doing that, he actually made me sort of later, so I imbibed this principle of doing my best, doing my very best, and sort of not having regrets. But at the same time, not having the ego of thinking that I am that I can be the ultimate influencer of whether it's an exam result, whether it's actually the economy. It's teamwork, and I do my very best, but there are a lot of things that are beyond my control. And I think while I won't deny it, initially it used to stress me, but that's because I was sort of learning on the job. But now I've actually come to saying I'm doing my very best. I'm thinking as hard and working and doing what I need to do. And I really pray and hope that the outcome is good. but I can't be the sole determiner of that outcome. And so that's the approach I take.
Very good. May I ask you this question? I imagine that you report to Nirmala Sitharaman, madam?
Yes.
Okay, and she's also from the same part in terms of her ethnicity. So do you sometimes talk to her in Tamil?
Yeah, she does.
Okay. அவங்கள்ட்ட நீங்க மீட் பண்ணீங்கன்னா என் சார்பாக வணக்கம்னு சொல்லுங்க கொஞ்சம். Sorry guys.
வணக்கம் சொல்லிடுங்க.
Okay. So here's a fourth question. This is a very important question for me at least. Okay. So if you think about capitalism, if you kind of very loosely define it as distribution of resources according to people's abilities. People who are very good, they get more money, more power, etc. Those who have with low abilities get less, so that society can improve. The best people get promoted. And socialism as the kind of opposite end of the spectrum, distribution of resources according to needs. You know, somebody's got cancer or somebody's got a big, family. They get a little more resources allocated to them. Which of these two ideologies do you kind of think that you belong to? You know, where would you put yourself in which ideology? And tell us a little bit about why.
So, and in this, I'll refer to, and those viewers who are interested actually can go and read the economic survey that I wrote this year. So that, and my team helped me put it together. So I actually would say that I would advocate dharmic capitalism. And I'll explain, in the following way. So, while the ideally capitalism should be one where resources are allocated according to abilities, according to the contribution to the economy, etc. But that ideal, and what we actually see in the real world, oftentimes is resources get allocated to those who have the ability to extract the maximum rents. And those rents could be in many times, and this happens, it could be in the form of the property that you inherited, just a house. That is also, your parents may have worked hard for it. You didn't work hard for it. It may be in terms of the wealth that you inherited. Again, you may not have worked hard for it. Your parents or maybe earlier generations would have worked hard for it. Even in terms of, compared to others, let's say, you may have gotten a much better education because you actually had the means to pay for it, and others did not.
So in other words, it's not a level playing field, right? It's not a level playing field.
In some sense, if you think about it, and just to give a parallel, if it is suppose a race that, we all have ran these 100-meter races, right? And, we all used to start at the same starting mark. And and then decide who's basically going to be the winner. But if suppose in that race, I was given saying, okay, you stay 10 meters ahead and then run that race. You would feel that the race is rigged. And that's because it's as if, let's say, my father ran that race, and he, or maybe my grandfather ran that race, and he finished basically 10 meters ahead, and he's given me that advantage. And then, now if I acknowledge that advantage very well, it's fine. But then oftentimes what happens is, this is what I've seen, those that get that 10-meter edge will be the ones to actually, because of their possibly, various motivations, will say, no, this is basically my own. I won the race fair and square. And that can really, sort of, can upset. So I think that is also something we have to recognize. Another point actually is, oftentimes, I think this is where I feel India has enormously to contribute. See, unlike in the West, in India, greed has never been considered as a good thing. Yeah. We've always distinguished between needs and wants. While I do understand there is a role for consumption in the economy, but there's also a role for investment. And actually, I would draw this distinction between an investment-driven economy versus a consumption-driven economy based on this ethos of, what do you emphasize more? Do you emphasize just greed, or do you emphasize basically needs, And I think it's that. So I do, and this is my my reading of a lot of our scriptures, etc. For instance, if you go and read the Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra, or you go and read Tirukural, written by Saint Thiruvalluvar, right? There is the economy is also economic principles and economic ideas are written on a bedrock of philosophy as well, and morality and spirituality, right? And that is, it is important to, these are not empty ideas, by the way, because, and this is work by, George Madison, who actually shows that for 3/4 of known economic history, India was the leading economic power in the world, touching about 33% of GDP, of world's GDP. Such kind of dominance for 3/4 up till about 1750-80. Such kind of dominance does not happen with accident. It happens by design. And that design was where we actually had, of course, we respected markets. Why? And why should we respect markets? Because prices are important signals, to direct resources, and that is important. But at the same time, the role of basically some of these underlying principles was very important. Actually, for instance, in India, and many of us would have learned while growing up, saying that the 4 noble pursuits of mankind, of humankind, is dharma, arth, kama, moksha. These are Sanskrit way. Basically, dharma is actually just, I don't mean dharma in religion, but in terms of, just the fact that dharma of fire is to burn, the dharma of water is to basically cool. And that's just the laws of nature, living, in consonance, in synchronicity with the laws of nature. That basically is dharma. Dharma, earth is basically material prosperity. Calm is desires, and moksha is liberation. And these were talked about, and actually that's how, so, in some sense, I think over time we've departed from these principles, economic, and it's important. For instance, I can tell you, willful defaulter, right? That cannot be rationalized in a dharmic capitalism, because, there is this, in the not just in Hinduism, but in other religions. In Hinduism, for instance, there is what is called the doctrine of pious obligation. That doctrine of pious obligation says that if your parent died with some debt, then it is beholden on the son to actually repay, because, debt, otherwise it has actually ramifications. Similarly, in Islam as well, if somebody, when a person dies, what they do is they actually come around with a container of notes, and they distribute saying, if this person took some, loan from you, please take it now, so that his last journey is without any, any debt. That is what the ethos actually, so willful default, cannot actually be sitting in a model of just pure, unadulterated capitalism. At the same time, socialism, has its problems. And I'll just use this example saying, if, we're both professors, if we basically told our students, irrespective of how well you do in your examinations, I'm going to give everybody an A, what will happen is that those who actually were working very hard and the best learners will then lose their incentive to work, and so that's what you have a problem. But so it's really important for actually, we can't go with socialism, but just unadulterated capitalism, which basically leads to rent seeking and thereby such gaping inequalities, is also not, or for that matter, not worrying about the planet. These are, so it is really important for capital, to have capital, which is respect markets, but have that bedrock of principles. And in fact, I must mention, after the global financial crisis, the Western world is also starting to recognize some of these, because the global financial crisis was a failure of trust, was basically a manifestation of greed. And having myself worked in an investment bank, I can actually vouch for some of these things. So it's really important that, the model of capitalism that we think about has actually, a basis of some of these very, very essential principles. And that's how we basically need to, and respect markets. So markets work very well. In India, actually, we tend to, not respect markets. They work 95 to 96% of the time. But they don't work 100% of the time. I think that is important to recognize. And that 5% of the time, to basically make sure that it works well, you need these, these principles. So that's my idea of what basically India needs to do. And I think India can become the exemplifier of this model if we go back to our, to our ethos, core ethos, and really respect markets and, and actually also, on these fundamental principles. And thereby emerge or evolve a model of dharmic capitalism, which is capitalism based on these fundamental principles, universal laws of nature.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that answer. Clearly, you're very passionate about this, and as you should be, I suppose. It makes sense. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. We have one more question from my side, then we're going to open it up, and I'm sure that there's lots of doctors and surgeons. That is the kind of vast majority of the audience. They have their own perspectives on this and their own questions. We'll want to open it up. So what I want to do is I want to ask a very general question to everybody. Okay. And while we don't have, unfortunately, we weren't able to do a poll for whatever reason. So it's going to be through the chat box that you answer the questions. I'm going to ask you this question right now. And I'll actually look at it. I'll keep an eye out for it. And in the meanwhile, while the answers are pouring in, I'd like to open it up to Dr. Janakiram to ask any questions that he might have. My question to the audience is, due to the coronavirus outbreak, do you think that the future of the economy is going to be actually worse, right, or better? I'm assuming very few people are going to say better, but nevertheless, let's confirm that. Okay, and the second follow-up question is, how long do you think the economic fallout is going to last? Okay, these are the two questions. Is it going to be better or worse because of the coronavirus outbreak? And how long, whichever direction you think it's going to go, is this effect going to last? Okay, is it going to be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or just a couple of months, and we're going to bounce back? Okay. And meanwhile, I'd like to turn it over to you, Janakiram. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add a perspective that you yourself have shown in research. Just to add, on this question, that you asked me about socialism versus capitalism, right? Your research has shown how happiness, does not come about just through money. I think, you should correct me if I'm actually talking about your research wrongly, but it seems as if, beyond, let's say, $65,000, $70,000 per year, if this is US income, till that time, if your earnings increases, then dollar for dollar, your happiness increases. But beyond 70,000, it does not increase at all. And here's where again, this is something which, every Indian gets to learn about it from when he's in his nappies, right? That basically happiness is what you should be pursuing. And of course, research is now catching up with this. But I just want to emphasize again that, remembering that humans eventually do everything for happiness, and money is also just a means for happiness, is important, if you have to recognize the difference between just unadulterated capitalism, which is basically involves rent seeking, and dharmic capitalism, which is, based on ideas like these.
Wonderful. Thank you. That is a very good summary of your philosophy. All right. So I think some answers are coming in to my question.
All answers are coming in, Raj. Actually, most of them have written that it's going to be poor for another 2 to 3 years. So can we ask some questions to Dr. Krishnamurthy?
Go ahead.
Is open for Q&A, or how is it?
We can make it open for Q&A. I just wanted to ask him what policies government of India might have in terms of tackling the economic fallout, and what other countries might have, and just to kind of a compare and contrast. But I do think we're at the time when we need to involve the audience as well, and maybe in the audience questions, this topic will also get touched upon. And it's not a big deal if it doesn't get touched upon. So let's actually go with the audience a little bit for here, and then
yeah. So I think it was a great talk. This was a personal journey. Dr. Krishnamurthy was really touching, and it's indeed a real pleasure to hear to people like this, coming from a modest background to reach levels like what you have reached. That is the idea of this whole, the journey of success. That was the actual topic. And but since you occupy the highest chair in the Indian scenario, we would also like to ask a few things because as citizens of India, we as doctors would like to, put forward certain questions to you so that we can clarify as to what the policies of the government are. So my first question to you is, during this economic crisis, the community as such, the Indian community is facing a lot of economic strain. So what are the actual challenges which you're going to face in the recent future and also in the distant future? And how have you planned to retrieve this economy? Can you just highlight upon the recent and the, Yeah.
Firstly, let me just correct. Krishnamurthy is my father's name. Subramanian is my name. Now, before
Raj calls you Mr. Shubhu.
So before I get into the specifics, I just want to point out some important research in behavioral economics that we should all keep in mind whenever we think about the world post-COVID. For instance, that some people basically were saying that nobody will go and watch a movie in a movie theater post-COVID, or people may not ever go and eat food in restaurants. These are the kind of prognostications that some of us have heard. The reason I bring this up is in behavioral economics there is this human bias, which actually all of us get subjected to in our decision making if we are not aware, which is what is called saliency bias, where we overweight evidence that just pops out on us, and recent evidence, of course, ends up therefore popping out on us a lot more than evidence that actually is from a little farther, let's say, in history. And so whenever we do extrapolations, then we may just overweight significantly and say, this is how it's going to be. And I'll tell you, this happens when we are in normal times. We keep extrapolating, saying no crisis is going to hit, we're going to continue in normal times. And then when we basically get into a crisis, then we keep thinking, we're going to continue in a crisis, right? So we do this extrapolation. I think what we have to recognize is that the truth always is somewhere in between. It isn't as bad as it seems now, nor was it as sanguine that at least on the health front as it would have seemed, let's say, a few months back. So I think this is, I think, a very important of wise thinking that we need to keep in mind, not extrapolate too much. Now, let me come to the evidence to actually back what I'm saying. And I'm sure you guys actually understand this as doctors, etc. You understand this far better than I do, but this is based on my reading. Historically, the most intensive pandemic that we've had was the 1918 Spanish flu, about 102 years back. The Spanish flu infected 1/3 of the entire population. The mortality rate was 10%. Just to give you a comparison, COVID has infected less than 1% of the population so far. 1/3, 33% versus less than 1%. Just do the numbers in your head. And mortality rate, 10% on average for Spanish flu, 3.4% globally for COVID. 1/3 of what Spanish flu was. That's on the health side. What happened on the economic side? On the economic side, in the year when the Spanish flu happened, there was a recession. I'm talking about data for the United States. 3.5% GDP shrunk by 3.5%. But the next year, GDP grew by 7.5%. Okay. The reason I actually preambled this question by saying we tend to suffer from saliency bias is that this piece of evidence, which is saying that the economy had like a V-shaped relationship, is what I mean is the decline in the year when the epidemic was bad, then followed by the revival, so that the slope basically of increasing GDP was continued, 3.5% down, 7.5% up. Is something that, and that's what evidence tells you about a pandemic which was far, far more, widespread and far more devastating than what we currently have. Just last bit on the health, again, why I think it's a good comparison. This is some work that I read by Larry Brilliant, the epidemiologist who was involved with the movie Contagion. He was saying that the Spanish flu, the R0, the parameter which captures how likely is an infected person to, how many people is he or she likely to infect. That parameter R0 for the Spanish flu was about 2.2 to 2.3. For COVID, epidemiologists have estimated it to be 2.4. So very, very, very much in that ballpark. And just to give you a contrast, the normal flu that we get every year, the R0 for that is about 1.2 to 1.3. That for smallpox or Ebola is about 3.5 to 4. So, and that's why the Spanish flu is a very good comparison, because the R0 in terms of the pandemic, the dynamics that is going to result, it's very similar. But, for various reasons, health infrastructure, etc., it had far more devastating consequences, and yet the economy actually did come back the next year. So the answers that have come here 2-3 years, I think, I must say, and this is I'm just giving an explanation as an academic, it's not to criticize anybody, just be aware of saliency bias when you are extrapolating on this. So that's number one. Number two, again, on the Spanish flu itself. There's very nice research that has now come looking at counties in the United States. These counties are equivalent of districts in India. What they show is these counties implemented what are called non-pharmaceutical interventions, which is a lockdown is a non-pharmaceutical intervention, but just a very extreme form of it. So counties implemented, school closures, theater closures, shopping establishments were closed, activity was closed down, etc. But there was a lot of variation in, this intensity of the measures that were taken. What is very telling, and actually is a very important, lesson for us as policymakers, which we imbibe, is that, those counties that implemented the interventions early, number one, and that's something which India has done. Number two, those counties that kept these interventions, longer, had lower mortality, okay? But the economic revival was also greater where the intervention was more intensive. In other words, where the mortality rate was lower because the intervention was more intensive, that's where the revival was also greater. And that makes sense because, finally you need, where the pandemic is greater, fear takes over, that fear will affect, consumption, everything. Again, one of the other behavioral traits that we need to keep in mind is oftentimes humans are very myopic in the way we, interpret data, make decisions, etc. And it's for people like us to actually look at in the long run and say this is what the evidence seems to suggest, which is important to keep in mind, that it's possible if we basically do we've taken the steps very early and we have actually put the lockdown. We are taking steps to get out of the lockdown, sort of gradually open up parts of the economy based on very careful analysis on various parameters, so that economic activity can really resume. But in the meanwhile, we also need to actually, because during the lockdown period, firms have been affected. If you think about what is the basic impact, it's one on the demand side, what we economists call a demand, especially demand for non-discretionary goods. If you are thinking of buying a car, likely that you will postpone it, you'll keep the money in the bank for the rainy day that we are already going through. Or if you're thinking about buying a house, we may actually decide to postpone that either. So non-discretionary consumption will come down. Firms similarly will also, if they have cash, they were thinking of investing, they'll say, why don't we wait it out? See how demand expands. Based on that, we'll basically, or how demand changes, we'll invest as well. So both investment and consumption do get impacted because of this. And if firms, let's say some firms go belly up, that may have supply side impact as well. So, now given this particular analysis, then the prognosis for policy has to be that we have to intervene on the demand side and we have to intervene on the supply side. But primary effect is on the demand side. And therefore, the steps that have been taken, in terms of direct benefit transfers, especially to vulnerable sections, etc., is quite important on the demand side. On the supply side, we're working on various measures to provide credit, because finally firms basically need cash flow to be able to tide over the current trouble. So that's in spirit, in essence, the kind of measures that we are working on.
Fantastic, actually. Can I unmute a few doctors for them to ask questions, if you don't mind, sir? Yeah, so I'm going to unmute Dr. Murugan. He's a neurosurgeon from Chennai Apollo Hospital. And Murugan, are you there? I'm unmuting you now. Tushar, can you? Yeah. Unmute. Yeah. Can you come on the screen, please?
Yeah. So this is a question which a lot of doctors and people who run hospitals, I'm sure, want to ask you.
Be a little louder.
Can you be a little louder, Murugan, please, Dr. Murugan?
Yeah. This is the question. A lot of doctors and people who run hospitals would definitely like an answer from you. See, a lot of medical equipment are imported into the country. Now, these are taxed quite heavily by the government. So considering that healthcare service is very essential and the government at the moment is not able to provide what the public really needs, is it possible to make these taxes zero?
I'll interpret that question more broadly. Yes, we are working on tax aspects as well, not only for some of the essential healthcare services, but of some of the others as well.
So we can look forward to lower, if not lower, zero taxes?
Yeah, they said they're working on that.
Right.
I would not want to get into specifics, but I've given you the broad answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Murugan. I'm going to unmute Dr. Prakash Munka. He's from Bokaro. He's a ENT surgeon from Bokaro. He's unmuted now. Dr. Prakash ji, please, you may ask your question.
Good evening, Mr. Subramaniam. First of all, when I was going through your CV, you Steel Township, Bokaro Steel Township, you must have heard about it. And there, the children were embedded either IIT means engineering or medical, no third thing. So I saw your journey. It's really inspiring. And now come back at this, what message will like to give?
Hello, you're not
been such young age. Am I audible, sir?
So please check connectivity at your end, sir.
Check your connectivity.
Okay, I'm listening. Hello.
Yeah, carry on. Please carry on.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So, what message you give to younger generation in the career building? That is number one. Number two, about the economy post-COVID, I know government is doing a lot. Only to have paid a lot of people. So, the middle class is upside from the government taxation and from lower side as they don't get any relief. So what is the government policy for that? Thirdly, our currency is going down. When we will see Indian rupee as a freely converting policy, like China has said they will do business in all their own currency, not US dollar. Your comments, please.
Okay, I actually am going to take, the first question. I didn't quite, I couldn't hear fully the other two questions. I think, the first question that was asked is, I think, very important, for youngsters. So the message that I would give youngsters is the following, based on my own experience. And let me put it the following way, and then let me portray these two scenarios and then give you what I think is, my take on it. So think about, let's say, the following two scenarios. One scenario is one where, you are 35, 40 years old, or take the car of your pick, BMW, Merc, whatever, and you're going in that car, but you're not really looking forward to get to work. Your basically work is seeming like a chore. Everybody from the outside who looks at you, the fact that you are sitting in a chauffeur-driven Merc or a BMW thinks you're so happy. But you are not looking forward to get to work. That's one scenario. Second scenario where you are, getting up in the morning, and after finishing your morning oblations, you actually you are really keen to get to work. You drive in a bicycle, you get to work. Everybody who looks at you from the outside must, thinks that, oh, it's such a loser, doesn't have a car, doesn't have, has to go in a bicycle, thinks you are a loser, but you are, you think you're a winner because you're happy doing what you're looking forward to get to work. I think if you, of course, the real world is not, in terms of these two stark choices, but oftentimes actually, thinking about it in the form of these two stark choices really brings clarity in terms of how you want to. I think it should be very clear. I go back to what I said earlier, that you don't live life for X, Y, Z or UVW. You live life for yourself. So it should be very clear that the second scenario where you are happy is what is, finally, I think I can tell you one of the things that I've benefited from is that very young, and maybe I think again I owe it to my parents who who inculcated this, saying that finally you do things for your own happiness, and so make the choices based on what you'll be happy. So given this, what I would say is let's say if I had a board, I would draw this, but just draw a 2x2 matrix. On one dimension you put do you like whatever activity, you like it or you don't like it. So the question, do you like it? Yes, no. And on the other dimension, you put basically, are you good at it? Yes, no. Now, if you actually are on the, the northeast cell where you like what you're doing and you're good at it, you've hit gold dust. Just stay with it. I think you'll be very privileged to actually have found a field where you're good at it and you like it. So no need, I just pick that. And don't listen to anybody else. Your life, you actually choose that. But oftentimes you actually you will not be in that cell. Now, if you don't like something, nor are you good at it, eliminate. That is no point thinking about it. The choice oftentimes is between the remaining two cells, which is, you like something, but you're not that good at. Or second is where basically you don't like it as much, but you're possibly good at. You should be choosing what you like because, and this is something where I would, use what Rahul Dravid said when he was playing. He actually wrote an article for Cricinfo, and I'm a big fan of Rahul Dravid. So he said that when he used to come back from tours, when you talk to his friends, they would be complaining about how work is a chore. They do it only because they have to put bread on the table. They don't enjoy their work. And he used to think internally, he used to think, I'm so privileged to actually be doing what I enjoy and earning a living out of that. I think that message is something which I would leave it with you. So when you're faced with this choice between these two cells, what you enjoy, but you're possibly not as good at this point in time, and what you're not, what you don't enjoy, but you are good at this point in time, choose what you enjoy. Because if you choose what you enjoy, you'll get onto a virtuous loop, which is because work will not seem like work, you will work hard. Work will not seem like work at all. And when you work hard, it's a simple rule of life. If you work hard, you will become good at it. If you become good at it, people will appreciate, you will feel like working harder, and that's how you get into the virtuous loop. But if you go on to doing something that you don't enjoy, the same loop will work the other way, which is vicious loop. And so, you may be good now, but you will not be as good later. And I think this is now embedded in this, what I've also said for every kid out there, and actually one of life's privileges for me has been to be working and knowing the best people in this planet, whether it is actually Nobel laureates, based on my last count, the number of Nobel laureates whom actually I've had either learned or worked with is in double digits. And I've had the opportunity to work with the leaders of a population of 1.4 billion people. What stands out, across these is that they all work very, very hard. They are passionate and they work very, very hard. There is absolutely no other formula if you want to be successful. If you want to actually take a shortcut to success, think that you may land in jail, which I'm sure is not enjoyable. The only way to success is hard work. So that's embedded in what I suggest. But if you want to really, live a happy life, then choose what you will enjoy. Money, power, privilege, everything. There's an expression in Hindi that says "dum daba ke aayegi." If you basically if you do what you enjoy and work hard, and that's the way I would say. Don't make your decision based on any of these outcomes. Do what you enjoy, and things will basically then, and work very hard. Right? And don't do the shortcuts. And I'm telling you this, maybe in this Kalyu, people will say, oh, everybody else is doing a lot of hanky-panky. I should also be doing hanky-panky. No. Follow that straight, narrow path. Work hard. Don't do anything, don't do anything hanky-panky, basically, because eventually you have to be able to see yourself in the mirror and try and achieve success the hard way. That's the way you will be, more than anything else, you'll be comfortable with yourself when you'll be 60, 70. You don't want to actually sell your soul to actually become successful.
Very nicely answered, Dr. Subramaniam. We have one more question, actually. So the middle class are the most affected here, especially the doctors, who are on a daily, monthly salaried basis. So they don't get the benefits of the lower class, like the direct transfers, and the upper class who get the benefits or the bigger economic policies of the FBI and others. So also the fact that most of the middle class are self-employed are the most affected during this time. Can we see a tax deduction do you have any policies for the middle class as such?
See, I think we have to recognize in India, yes, middle class, is there, but the proportion of people who are poor in India is far more, and they are also people whom we have to keep in mind. Think about the migrant labor, for instance, right? They are not as well to do as the middle class either. I think now this is just to make you conscious that yes, everybody thinks that their own troubles are the most important. But I think if we just look around and see, especially in a country like India, there are others who also we need to keep in mind. At the national level, it's a very thin, balancing, very delicate balancing act between giving, benefits to various sections of society. And as I said, finally, the most vulnerable are the ones that have to, and those are basically poor, many of whom may not be able to even get some of the basic necessities in life. They are the ones that we have to keep in mind.
And one more question is that, will there be a ban on medical tourism from foreign countries till COVID-19 crisis blows over? Will there be some sort of, restriction on medical tourism? Do you see that?
I think it's a very specific question. See, it's in the way the government works is that some of these policies, individual ministries have to come up with. So this will be in the domain of the health ministry. I think, I can give you a broader principle, which is till the time that the pandemic is not over, we will be very careful in terms of, travelers, especially from international countries, international travel. And that's the principle by which we will go.
So I'm going to unmute Dr. Rakesh Gupta. He's from Chhattisgarh. Actually, he belongs to your place, and he's a lovely friend of mine. Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji, you are unmuted. Can you go ahead with your question, please?
Nice to hear you that you have done your schooling, Mr. Subramaniam. There are some worries in post-corona, like in middle sector or lower middle class. Is there any clear-cut policy for liberalization and for their earning to be eased out? Because there will be a prediction that the economy will slow down, and there are more factors regarding medical tourism. Since the Indian medical fraternity has proved themselves that they are good at everything across the world, so will there be any policy regarding easing out medical tourism in India?
I thought I answered this.
That's what he answered. That was the previous question.
Yes. Regarding easing out policies for the lower middle class and the laborers.
My
first question.
That question as well.
That is also answered, Dr. Rakesh Gupta ji.
Yes, thank you. Giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. So, do you have any questions? So let me just scan there are so many, so it's just running away, so I'm not able to keep track. So what's going to be the, so two questions from my side. Actually, the government has asked us to sort of, most of the small time nursing home players to actually pay the salaries till the lockdown is, taken off. So, do you have any comments on that? Because many of them, my friends, they phone up and tell me that I'm paying so much. This is the problem for me. I'm not earning. This is something which is universally talked about by the medical practitioners who own medium-sized to large-sized nursing homes. Is there any, answer to this question?
I'll give you the broad spirit behind, behind this. See, let's recognize, and I'll give you a simpler example. All of us have, for instance, maids who are coming, maids or people who come to do work for us. Now, because of the lockdown, they are not coming, to work. But we are continuing to give them salaries. Why? Because for us, that maybe 6,000, 7,000, or even 10,000 rupees that we are giving out, actually, and we have to dip into our savings in giving that. For us, that 10,000 rupees maybe is not as much, but for that family, that 10,000 rupees is very, very important. And I think here we have to recognize that between the promoter or that owner of that, whether it's a nursing home or a firm, and the workers, I think very clearly who's likely to have the savings to be able to live through this phase. I think the answer should be very, very clear.
Very well taken. The answer very well taken, actually. Yeah.
If all of us basically start saying that, we basically will only look after and not care about those workers, then they'll lose their employment, and they'll be far worse affected than us. And so I think this is something which I always remember, that a transfer of basically a few rupees, let's say, is not. It's not that important for us, but it's quite important for them. And actually, again, because we were talking about this, I learned this, when I was young. We used to go in these cycle rickshaws, and especially in winter, when we came back from somewhere, my father, would never haggle with the cycle rickshaw guy. Whatever he asked, my father would give it to him. And at that time, I used to think that, my father is not smart, or he basically doesn't save money. He doesn't haggle. If he haggles, he can save those few rupees. When I became a little older, actually, then in conversation, he was mentioned that, for me, that 5 rupees is not that important. But for that cycle rickshaw guy, that 5 rupees is hugely important. And that taught me how it's the same 5 rupees. But, when it goes from my father's pocket to that, that rickshaw puller's pocket, that 5 rupees makes a hell of a difference. That is something which we have to keep in mind as well, in these very, very testing times, that while our difficulties, people like us, who have the privilege of having some savings, be those savings in financial assets or in, other assets, we can dip into our savings. But if we behave in, very self-interested ways, the difficulty that we can create for people who depend on us will be far more. Now, that's the spirit behind what, the measure that we have talked about. That said, the government is working on trying to reduce the difficulties for the employers as well, as much as possible, so that the difficulties that employers may be facing can also be tided over.
I have a friend from UK. His name is Narayanan Vinod Kumar. He's a doctor, a surgeon from London. He would like to ask a question. Dr. Vinod, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Janet.
Yeah.
Mr. Subramanian, it is a nice candid talk that you've given. So regarding the economic survey that you have partly brought about with your department, now that has been a pre-COVID state of the economic survey. So does it need revision post-COVID with the recession looming ahead and the change in the talinomics that you mentioned over there?
So firstly, the economic survey, volume 1 is comprises ideas that have relevance not only, this year, but have relevance for a much longer period of time. For instance, we talked about the theme of the economic survey was, ethical wealth creation. And, my answer to Raj's question on dharmic capitalism, derives from this, from the work that we did in the economic survey, the ideas that we brought in about ethical wealth creation, which is by combining the invisible hand of markets together with the hand of trust and ethics. Those have relevance far beyond episodes like these, whether it's Talinomics even Talinomics. By the way, Talinomics was one of the 13 chapters that we wrote in the economic survey. It was a way of actually measuring, whether a family of 5 people are they better off in terms of their ability to pay for something as basic as food, or is it that they are worse off? And I would say applying that particular barometer, using the fact that the government has now, as part of the COVID package, 5 kg more cereal for every individual and 1 kg pulses for the entire household. Is basically giving it, as free. That does take care of the important part of what families have to pay for, because cereal, remember in the Talinomics chapter as well, we showed accounts for 50% of the cost of what families have to pay for. So I would say that these steps have basically been taken to ensure that the cost of putting that thali together does not increase significantly for the average family in India.
Thank you.
Hey, sorry to intervene. We are at 8:50 here, which is what 750 out there, right?
It's 7:20.
7:20. We had scheduled for about an hour and 15 minutes, and we are at that point right now. I just wanted to make sure that we have a plan for when we're going to stop. I myself have a hard stop.
One last question, and then I think we will. By Subhash Jain, who has asked, what are your views on unemployment rising, and how do you? How is the government going to plan to overtake this? Do you have any specific measures to tackle with this?
Firstly, I want to point out, I think this is something which is not just specific to India. If you look at the United States, for instance, the number of people who have, applied for claims for unemployment insurance is at a historical high, greater than even the numbers during the Great Depression that happened in the 1930s. So, an episode like this, an economic episode like this, does affect, every country. So I think we need to keep that perspective in mind. The measures that we talked earlier, whether it's on the supply side or the demand side, are intended, and even the questions when I was responding to the question on nursing homes actually is about ensuring that people don't lose their jobs, and the government is working on the steps to ensure that the necessary steps are taken.
Okay, so if you don't mind, guys, just to kind of end it on a slightly more informal, perhaps joyous kind of a note, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course. Of course,
okay.
Raj.
So there's lots of pictures hanging behind you, and the picture on your left is obviously with the Prime Minister. And I was just wondering about some of the pictures on the right. Can you just pick a picture and tell us a little bit about it? what it's about?
Okay, I'm sitting in my living room here. So these are pictures of, one of them is meeting the President of India before the budget. So the process is that, on the day of the budget, the President is briefed about the budget, before it is presented to the cabinet. And so the team that works on the budget gets to, accompany the Honorable Finance Minister to go and meet the President. So one of that is basically meeting that. A couple of the others are, when I presented the economic survey, pictures that were taken and that were shared. So one is the July survey that I had presented, and another is the January survey that I had presented. So
awesome. Okay.
Really wonderful.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me from here, but one of them kind of looked like Rahul Dravid. I wasn't sure. Maybe not. Okay, thank you so much for doing the session. I really appreciate it, taking your valuable time off to speak to us. And thank you, Janakiram, for giving me the opportunity to be a co-moderator on this. And thank you all the attendees for coming. It was a real pleasure from my side, and very, very enjoyable and exciting for me. So I have to leave in another 5 minutes, and I'm sure that all of you have plans as well. So thank you again. Over to you, Rajan.
I want to thank Rajan, my brother, for having introduced me, and I should convey my personal thanks to you for an excellent lecture which you've given. I mean, also the questions which came to you were answered so well. I thank all the panelists for having taken part in this, and I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much, and goodbye to all of you. Thank you so much. And vanakkam.
I must say Raj actually was a fabulous moderator, and thank the audience also for such wonderful questions, and to you as well for organizing this session. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Very good. Maybe we should just very quickly apologize to the people whose questions we weren't able to take. As you might understand, hopefully you understand that, it's just so difficult when so many questions come in. If you still have some burning questions remaining, maybe you can kind of email it to me, and I will try my best to get them answered. I'm just going to type in my email address right here. And if we can't get the CEA to answer the questions, I will give you my perspective on those. Okay. It will be a very poor substitute. But
Raj, don't give my email, because I can't answer any of the questions. I can only direct it to the happiness expert.
All right. Okay. Adios. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.